Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Be to Lead conversation. I have a privilege to have here with me another amazing woman, Kristen Anderson. Welcome, Kristen. So happy to have you here.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure.
Kristen is, as just said, another remarkable woman that is participating in this B2 Lead conversation. Kristen is vice chair and board member of European Women on Board and former chief diversity and inclusion officer of Barilla Group. So we are going to hear an amazing leadership story from Kristen today. So, Kristen, why don't I leave you introduce yourself briefly? Who is Kristen Anderson?
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Well, I'll start off with my upbringing. I think is people probably guess that they know I'm American from my accent. I grew up in the U.S. in New Mexico, a very unknown state, up in the Rocky Mountains. And the reason I point this out is that it's where the scientific laboratory is that developed the atomic bomb. So it's very kind of scientific city, and a very big encouragement on sciences and math and the STEM functions. So I really always wanted to be, a scientist, and I always planned to be a chemical engineer. My father, he worked at the laboratory his whole life, and he was, and my mother, she was a language teacher. So I also had this interest in cultures and language. And so when I graduated, I went in to study chemical engineering and then my master's degree. So I did two, bachelor's and master's around the US, and started working in the food industry, because I like this idea of, basically developing something that you could taste at the end. And it's, it's scientific, but at the same time, consumers, preferences change. We don't like the same food we liked 5 years ago, maybe. So I really like that. And I worked for many years with Kraft Foods in Chicago. After many years in different roles, and my husband and I both worked in Kraft. And Kraft was great because we came to them and said, we want to move overseas. We really always wanted to live and work. We had traveled a lot, but we wanted to live overseas. And we went to Australia. They moved us to Australia. So 3 years running different parts of I ran R&D. My husband worked in the supply chain area. Then 5 years in Munich with Kraft and doing different roles, which is fantastic. And then you probably know, if you know the food industry, there was a lot of, mergers, acquisitions, Cadbury, et cetera. And Kraft said, we want you to come back to the US. And we had decided many years before that we really wanted to stay overseas, really liked the intercultural aspects. So left Kraft and went to Coca-Cola in China, spent 3 years working and building an R&D center in Shanghai. And then towards the end of this story is we're looking for another role because we really wanted to come back to Europe. And for some reason, the headhunter for Barilla, for a position with Barilla, which is the Italian food company, found me and offered me a role in R&D in Parma, Italy. And that's where I am and ended up. And I spent many years with Barilla in that role. And then Barilla started working heavily on diversity and inclusion and invited me to be on their D&I board. Actually, my boss, head of R&D, nominated me. And I always thank him so much for what he did for me. So I worked on D&I as a second hat and eventually became the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, working for the CEO of Barilla. So that's how I not ended, but that's where I am now. That role is a rotating role. They designed it, I think, very smartly, that after a certain number of years, time to pass it to someone else. And it was my time to pass the role to another great person, Talita. And I left and I kind of retired from Barilla. And now that's how I started working on the nonprofit European Women on Boards as their vice chair, which is an organization working on more gendered equality in Europe, in decision-making roles like C-suite and board roles. So there's kind of me in a quick summary.
Wow, what an amazing experience. And you must have a richness of lessons to share with us. You have been exposed to different cultures. You had important roles in big corporations. You traveled a lot, and you have been part of different areas. You have worked in different areas of the world and lived there as well. So if you look back now from where you are today, and you look back at your story, where you are today, is it where you actually wanted to be? Who you are today, is it someone you knew you wanted to be, or was kind of life that helped you to take you there?
Well, I think it's an interesting question because, sometimes, hindsight, you look back and say, oh, I wish I'd known that in this decision. But I would say yes and no. Yes, I knew I wanted to be a scientist, and I knew I wanted to work in a field where science was appreciated and work on something new and innovative. So in that way, yes. The part that, and I knew I wanted to experience other cultures, and more than the superficial level of traveling is really living overseas, because I did spend a year in Wales when I was young. My dad had a sabbatical, so kind of, I think, fueled this interest in understanding cultures more deeply. Did I think that I would end my career as a chief diversity and inclusion officer? No, I didn't. That I kind of say I fell into that role and was really one of the best jobs that I ever had in my career. So yes and no, but I think sometimes you have to, you're not going to be able to plan everything, and sometimes things come your way, and I think you just need to kind of jump into the adventure of it and say, this could work out, and maybe I might not be my favorite place to live or my favorite job, but really for 2 to 3 years, I think that in the span of our lives, you will always learn something, and it can be a great experience. So even though I might not have liked it, or my husband and I maybe didn't like so much certain places that we lived as much as others, we always said, well, but for 2 to 3 years, how, you don't need to stay there for 10 years, and we're going to learn something. We're going to learn a new language, a new culture, and we'll be, I think, more inclusive and more intercultural for that experience.
That's awesome. I hear you already expressing the importance of being open to what you do not plan, but just comes your way, even if it is not part of your frame of reference, I would say, right? Something that you thought about and you wanted to do. So if you, again, we look back at this amazing path of yours, you have jumped into adventures, you said, and you were open to 2-3 years experience. You say, well, just 2 to 3 years, you can learn something and then you can move on and change. Can you identify in your path maybe 2 or 3 key moments, the famous sliding door moments, that if you chose differently, you wouldn't be who you are today and you wouldn't be where you are today? Can you identify a few moments where you actually were aware, this is a key moment in my life and it can make a difference?
Yes, I think that I would say two key moments. I think the first was leaving craft after 18 years, and taking a big jump to go to a new company in a new country that I never lived in, didn't speak the language, in a new role, was a big jump, and didn't know, am I going to be successful? Is this going to work out? Is it going to be scary? Yes, it probably is, because I think a lot of people were shocked. After 18 years in craft, wouldn't you stay your whole career? And I think it's comfortable. You know what? After a while, things are comfortable, and we like comfort. Human beings like to be comfortable. We don't always like to push ourselves into that scary point. But I thought, well, you know what? At this point, it's the right point. It's the right point to go and try something completely, a bit scary, and see how I can be successful. And I knew that I had supportive management, and actually I had a great manager who was a manager previously at Kraft. So it wasn't that I didn't know anyone, but I only knew just my manager. And I think that was a huge growing experience. We're given a lot of, empowerment to do things in China. There was a great team there, really learned a lot and enjoyed it. And it gave me a whole new experience. So that was a big leap after being comfortable in one company. I think the second piece was when Barilla came to me, my manager, Patrick Armand, came to me and said, I'd like to offer you this role on the D&I board. I loved the idea, but it was not something that it was a separate role. It was on top of your day job. It was something you needed to be passionate to do. And I think some people turned it down and said, there's no kind of title. It's not a promotion. It's going to take extra time. But I said, I think this is going to be great, because I love, in my experiences, diversity and inclusion is one of the keys to being successful yourself, and also for companies to be successful. So I think saying, yes, sign me up right away, was another big step, because no matter how it turns out, I'm going to be a better leader and a better manager if I have this experience. And it ultimately ended up being a role which I never expected it to be.
So what would you say were the skills that you actually applied, or your qualities that you applied in these particular situations? Because many people find themselves offered positions, not a proper role, but in addition to their positions, or asked to move to other countries, and they say no. Maybe they would want to, but they say no. So if you look back and you think about yourself, what made the difference there for you? What are the resources that you tapped into, or the skills that you had to bring up in order to say yes?
Well, I think to your point about some people look at getting offered another position in another country and they say no. And I have to say that superficial on the top level can be a challenge, because take an example, and if you take like numbers and salary and Coca-Cola, had a team of 100 people, stock options getting paid a lot of salary because it's a big company. That's not the same situation in Barilla. It's a family-owned company. There's no stocks. You had a smaller team, and many people would say, well, why would you do that? Why would you reduce what it appears to be your responsibility level? But for me, it was, well, does it really matter how many people report to me? Is that really the point? Or is the point to do something you love and build a team and be able to learn something new? So I think for me, it's always this learning curve. I know about myself that if I'm doing the same role exactly the same way for too long, to me, it gets stagnant, and I don't like stagnant. I like something to keeps me always learning, and maybe not always at a very hugely steep learning curve, but still in this learning. And so even in the same role, I would always ask, is there something else I can do? Can I be in a different project to learn something new? And so I think I would advise people, don't look at just the numbers of what's written on a position description. If someone's asking you, would you like to move to Amsterdam to run this team? And it seems like, well, my team's 20 and that team's 5. Is that really the point? Is the point, or is it the point you're going to get a whole new experience and a whole new culture, and you're going to learn things that are going to make you even a better leader? So I think that's not always looking at things on the numbers level and thinking, what else could this bring for me? And then I think to being more intercultural, I've learned, because I've made a lot of mistakes, as we all do when we're dealing with other cultures we're not familiar with, is listening and really asking for feedback and taking it, not asking it because someone told you need to ask for feedback, but really caring about the feedback. I remember when I first moved to China, after about 3 months, my HR manager came to me and said, Kristen, in our staff meetings, in our first line meetings, I would strongly suggest that you speak less often and you speak last. And I was just being my typical self, just interjecting things. And I was not so interculturally aware of different dimensions of culture of the Chinese. And she said, if you speak up in the middle, then people are not going to disagree with you in public. So it's better that you get everyone else's opinion, and then you input at the end, because I was getting frustrated that people were kind of nodding their heads yes, and that doesn't mean in all cultures yes. I was interpreting it wrongly, and they didn't want to disagree with me. So I think you make mistakes, you learn. But now, when I'm dealing with other cultures, then I also know, hey, a lot more listening, a lot more questioning, make sure not to judge, and those things will make you a stronger leader and a better manager of others.
Very powerful suggestion, especially because we know that often women do not ask lots of questions. And you suggest asking questions, and actually you are invited to wait and give space and create a space in a culture where otherwise they wouldn't take it, so to speak. So you said I made lots of mistakes. Can you share some? Mm-hmm. And what have you learned from those mistakes?
Well, I would say, I would say the mistakes are a lot of times cultural. And, a lot of people, we make mistakes and we don't intend to. People don't know our intentions. Our intentions are in here. So if we make mistakes and we realize it, then we need to tell people, I'm sorry, I didn't understand, and learn from that. I think that when I came to Italy, the mistake I made, and the understanding that I didn't have, is that some cultures are very relationship based and some are very task based. So if you're working in Anglo-Saxon culture, and before that I'd worked in Germany, I can meet you, Barbara, say you're German, and say, hi, hello, Barbara. We maybe speak 5 minutes on our backgrounds, and then we just get down to work. I have my role, you have your role, you start working. That's not the way it works in all cultures. And I did not focus enough time on relationship building, because in a lot of cultures, things get done via relationships, and that you need to build strong relationships. And some people judge, and that's why I said, you really got to turn off the judgmental mindset. People judge, for example, the Italians. Why are they always going to have coffee and spending so much time having lunch? And, they're judging it's a waste of time. But, if you're a relationship built, based culture that gets things done through others, you need to build those and nurture those relationships. And so I think that in every move that I've made, I've gotten more cultural understanding. And I think that's very important, because if we're just judging that the way I do it and my culture is best and your culture is not as good as mine, or the way you're doing is not as good as mine, we're not going to be very successful, because that's really not inclusion. So I think that's a piece that I learned, is to be much more aware of cultural differences, and really build the relationships in a style that might not be my comfortable style.
Yeah, beautiful. And that is so important today, especially, right? Because we are exposed to different cultures, even if we are staying at home and we do not move from our own culture.
And, for staying at home, Barbara, we tend to look at the cultures through the TV. And what happens is we get, kind of the negative aspects of the culture. We also get, the stereotypes of the culture from what we see on the TV. And, that's why I tell people, because I do intercultural training, and I do some D&I, just some D&I discussions with others. And I say, we all have biases. We need to understand which ones we have, because humans all have them. And then we need to work on removing them. So if I have a bias because of what I've seen on TV and I've never met a person of that culture, then I should go out there and try to meet someone different than me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have clearly an impressive career, and very successful one. And you are a woman. I wonder, have you encountered on your path challenges because you were a woman? What were key challenges that you encountered throughout your career, and how did you overcome that?
No, I think, Barbara, any senior level, or any woman, it doesn't be senior level, has it, as would also people from all other types of underrepresented groups have faced challenges. So I'm not the only one. And yes, I think the first is being a woman engineer. I remember when I was actually graduated from my master's degree, and you go out and you interview in different companies, and they fly you to the locations. I was interviewing with a big multinational in the U.S. for a position, and they put you together with someone who's recently joined the company, and you have your interview schedule, and you go and interview with different people. And at the end of that, he was asking me, how did it go? And I said, it was all good, except it was really quite difficult, this quiz that one of the interviewers gave me. And he's like, oh, a quiz? What quiz? I said, you didn't have a quiz? Because he had joined a year earlier. No, he interviewed with the same gentleman who didn't give him a quiz. And I really felt, and I actually asked some of the other interviewees, the quiz was only for me as a woman engineer. And so, you can say nothing and do nothing about it. One thing, you're back to, what did I learn? I learned that saying nothing means you are not bothered by it. You don't agree with it. So when I actually got an offer from that company and I declined the offer, I told them why. I told them specifically why. And I think that those are the pieces that you have to face, but you also have to say it doesn't have to be that way for others. When I started as an engineer in the factories, I was young female. I was the only female. There were all more older male engineers. They, I would say something, they would ignore it. Someone would say the same thing 10 minutes later, and they would listen. And I just realized that, I had to say something like, but I think that's what I said, 10 minutes earlier. Even if that's a bit difficult. And eventually, hopefully you also get male allies who are the ones that say, I think Kristen said that, we don't have to be quiet. We can do it also in somewhat soft way. We can use our own type of style. But I think we face those challenges, we faced being talked over. And I think that one way that it works is to have those male allies. And I think that's a role for men. Is to not only say I support women, is to actually not be a bystander, be an active male ally. So I think most women, I'm sure you and most people that are listening, will have been in a meeting and they see that, the woman's talked over more or interrupted or repeat what she said, and now it's paid attention to. And there's ways to softly say, I don't think Barbara finished talking. That's not so harsh. Or, Barbara, you said that a few minutes ago. Why don't you add on to what you were saying? So it's a soft way, but men can do that, because if I do it, it sounds like I'm being aggressive or mean about it. So
That is very, very, sorry, Kristen, just pointing out that it is very powerful, especially because I think that there is space for, and men must be part of really a new way for women to access leadership and to collaborate actually with women in leadership. But let me make a step back, please, because I would like to dig a little bit more on how you actually faced these, in the sense that you are discovering that you are given a quiz and the other candidates were not, and it is because you are a woman. I imagine you were. What did you experience? What did you feel? Was anger? Was frustration? Were you sad, upset? What emotions did you have to face, and what did you tell yourself? I'm trying to understand, because often we are not aware of what's going on inside of us that we have to overcome, and it is from the inside out that we need to overcome situation first of all, right? So what did you leverage in that moment, if you can go back to that situation? What happened inside of Kristen in that moment?
Well, I think one of, we all should think about what are our key values that we have as a person. And one of my key values is fairness. I always felt that, everyone doesn't need to be treated equal, because we're not all equal, but we should be treated fairly for our situation. So I felt it was very unfair. I also felt that probably the company didn't know that senior leader was giving quizzes only to women, or at least just to me. I don't know what other women experienced. So I said, I don't think that's fair. And so I said to the person that was escorting me that I got a quiz and you didn't, and I think it needs to be brought up to the attention of, of HR. And then I said something to HR, did you know, in a soft way, I didn't say I feel discriminated against, but I said, it was strange that because they kind of debrief you at the end before you leave, and that I had this quiz, and I did learn from my buddy that he didn't have the quiz. So I think it's something you should look into. And then when I told you, when they got the offer, because they did give me an offer, I declined it because I felt that, for sure, if there's not enough oversight of some of these senior leaders as interviewers, that there's not maybe enough diversity and inclusion of women in the organization. And I chose to join another company, and I told them why.
So was that response something that you developed the ability to respond in that way? So I am aware that is not fair. It is my key value. I feel that it is unfair, and therefore I am going to speak up and I'm going to say something. This is, for you, it seems like it was pretty straightforward. So there was no hesitation there. And this is an ability, this is a skill. And often we need to grow and evolve in being able to do this. How was that for you? Did you learn that? Was the example of someone? Did you have mentors that helped you with it? Was your mother, was your father, the people you were surrounded by, that you can say, you know what, I learned it from them? Or was it, no, I was simply aware, I was extraordinarily mature already, and I had done work on myself? How was that?
No, I think because this is, again, when I was still in graduate school, so I really hadn't started working yet. And, a part that I didn't mention, that I was extremely shy when I was growing up. I mean, I was kind of, you can't tell from this because it's virtual, but I'm quite tall. I'm almost 6 feet tall. I was taller than most of the people in my class. So you can imagine, and I was, kind of an introverted person. My father's quite an introverted Swede. So, and so I was shy. And so what I decided to do when I left to go to college is that's not who I want to be. And that doesn't mean I put on another aura, but I need to kind of push myself to be not as shy, to try to, be more. I had a lot of ideas. I just didn't feel comfortable amongst, certain people to express myself. And I think that's what we face, a lot of women face, or a lot of underrepresented groups face. When you're the minority, do you feel so comfortable expressing a different point of view? No. Generally, that you want to fit in with the majority. But I said, look, I need to try to push myself to be more, not outgoing and change myself, but to express myself better, and to also stand up for what I think is fair. Because you know what, if I don't stand up for it for me, what happens to the women that are coming later and in the pipeline? Do they have to go experience all this also? And a lot of women, that I mentor have told me, I didn't realize that was a behavior that wasn't inclusive, because they was telling me I get talked over a lot, or I was in a meeting and actually one of the men shouted at me because I disagreed with him. I said, well, that's not, Giovanna, that's not actually normal. That's not actually normal behavior. But she had kind of grown up in an organization where that's what happened. And so she didn't think she was the only woman on the team. And I'm not blaming men, but no of her male colleagues wanted to stand up in the meeting and say something that's not appropriate. So we kind of get ingrained that this is what we should be used to. And I'd say, don't be used to it. Realize that that's not fair. You're not being treated the same. And how can you, leverage male ally? How can you go, talk to someone and say, I need to be listened to? How can you try to, stand up for yourself or have another woman do it? So there's different ways. And it doesn't mean you have to be the one that stands up and says, hey, you're not listening to me. But there's ways to do it that can also be within a style. But I think we have to kind of push ourselves to not take it that's the role we have to play.
And if you had to teach me how to push myself, because you are mentoring a lot of remarkable women and young women, I'm sure. And and this is a suggestion, right? Push yourself to go beyond what is your comfort zone and actually express yourself better, stand up for what you believe in. How do I do it? So when I am shy, as you said you were, right? Or I am in doubt and I need to push myself. What am I actually doing? Is it that I need to just try to ask a question? Do I need to knock at somebody's door? Do I simply need to have an emotion? So what does that look like, this pushing myself? Yeah. What was it for you, the experience like?
No, I think, it can be all of those. There's not one thing, because it has to be tailored to how comfortable you feel. Like, I can't tell you what's going to feel comfortable for you. But one point to remember is that when women have 85% of the skills to do another job, a bigger role, they say they're not ready. We say we're not ready. When men have 40%, they'll say they're ready. And I'm not saying this is bad, that men are bad, women are good. No, I'm not saying that. It's a proven gender difference. So we may feel uncomfortable expressing ourselves or saying, I'm ready for this role, because that's part of the ingrained cultural aspect, culture, gender, all of that, our societal upbringing. But we have to realize, maybe I need to talk to someone who's my peer and say, what do you think about this? No, a lot of times peers or partners will say, you should apply for that job. Why are you saying you're not ready for that job? Why didn't you speak up? And think, well, if I had something to say and I didn't speak up, what was the reason? Because there was I was definitely the unique person, or I've been talked over before. Then let me think of a different strategy. Maybe I go talk to a few of my male colleagues before, and we all agree that's a good idea. And we bring it up together, and they say, yeah, this was Kristen's idea or Barbara's idea. There's different ways to do it, but just don't let it be the normal and accept that that's the way it should be. It's not. And please.
And it seems to me also that what you are inviting us women to do is not to keep doubting ourselves. So, and not putting in question your abilities, right? But actually take that as a fact. You have enough qualification, you have enough experience, you are ready for that position, even if it is the 85%, or even if it is less. So I also hear you saying, probably we need to become more aware that we doubt ourselves more and we keep putting ourselves into questions. Whereas what you're saying is there to trust that who you are, what you have achieved, and what you are doing is enough to move forward.
It could be enough. And then there's the role of mentors and role models and colleagues to help you and support you. And, again, I think that, you hear it a lot in the news now, imposter syndrome, or, women have to have more confidence. I think this should not be about fixing women. It's also should not be about fixing men. It's about, if we believe that there is a lot more talent there, that's diverse talent, that this world should be much more equal in gender and equal in different types of diversity, more people with different sexual orientation, different abilities, all at the table, people with different generations and backgrounds, and we should listen to them because they'll be stronger. Then we need to figure out a way to bring those voices out. And that's not only the person there, it's also, if I'm the team leader, I should be thinking, why did Barbara not say anything for this whole last meeting? I'm sure she has something to add, because most people don't go into a meeting or into a project with absolutely nothing to add. I always tell people, if someone doesn't speak up, your first assumption is they had something to add, but the situation wasn't comfortable. If I'm a boss that's just going to listen to my own voice and no one else, I don't need to have everyone in the room, right? So I think
Mm-hmm.
that there's a two-way piece here, but I think I don't think that, for example, European Women on Boards, where I'm a vice chair, we're not there to fix women. We're there to work with male allies to say what's holding us back from having more gender equality, which means more women moving up the pipeline and taking senior positions in the C-suite and the board. And there's many reasons. There's bias, there's gender bias, gender differences. And there's, sometimes people say there's just not enough senior women. Well, maybe there aren't in an organization because they haven't been grown, nurtured, and mentored.
Mm-hmm. So the role also of exploration, before you talked about adventure, now you're saying we are not fixing anybody here. And I think that I think that also the idea that we want to start thinking in terms of exploring something new, that means that we might even not know what comes out of it or how we will actually be able to handle that. But we trust in ourselves and in the situation, in our mentors and colleagues, and just explore what's possible. And that becomes also a first step, right, to move beyond our...
Exactly. Think about your own personal development. I mean, we all know that we learn almost the most of the mistakes that we made. You were asking about mistakes I made. I remember when I was working in Chicago with Kraft fairly early in my career, and I was a team leader for a new project. I had a brainstorming, and more the senior manager came, and people were coming up with ideas, and some of them had been tried before, some of them maybe weren't good. And I guess I was quite, maybe not inclusive. I was not listening to the idea. It was like, we tried that. Okay, we did that in the past, that typical thing. And my boss came to me afterwards and he was a great role model because he gave me a lot of feedback. He said, that was not an inclusive way to manage. And you were perceived as being too much of a, just not listening to anyone. And I said, oh, didn't realize that. I took that feedback and I realized that wasn't my intention, but that's remember, intentions are not actions. So learning from the feedback, and if people are not giving it to you, asking their feedback, and don't ask them, how was that presentation? The best way to ask for feedback I found is say, tell me one thing I could have done differently.
Beautiful.
You say that one word, because you tell me, how did I go? How did I do? Good. It was very good. No, Barbara, that was excellent. You say one thing I could have done differently. Generally, people will share. And that's where you're going to really learn a lot. Because again, back to, we learn a lot from our mistakes, probably more than our successes.
Beautiful, beautiful. And you have mentioned several times now, mentors and role models. What was the role? I'm sure you had mentors, you said it, right? What was the role of mentors and role models throughout your career? And did you actively look for them, or did they just happen to be there in your life?
So, I think role models and mentors are different roles, just as a coach is a different role as well. Role models, I think, I had a lot of role models that I looked to and said, that's the style of leadership that I aspire to have. Because there are certain things in the way that person's leading that I would like to also take into my leadership style. And it was more like watching. It was more like looking up and seeing, role models that kind of reminded me maybe of myself or things that I would like to incorporate into my leadership style. To be honest, they were mostly men. And that's probably because, back then when I was starting, or also now, there's not so many women, there's more, but not so many women senior leaders, especially in industries that are more consumer goods or R&D, et cetera. But I think that there was a lot of good role models that I watched. Now, mentors is different. The role of a mentor is different. A mentor should be helping you with, specific objectives in your career or your leadership style, or giving you suggestions how to overcome challenges. I was fortunate enough to work for companies who had mentoring programs, but I was assigned to a mentor, and sometimes that worked very well and sometimes not. But if you don't, then I think you should look for mentors. I've also done that. I've looked for mentors and asked someone to be a mentor. I've gone to another woman and said, can we spend some time? And you don't have to say, can you be my mentor? You could say, could we have lunch together? Because I like what you said there, or I would like to know more about your career, or I have a challenge that I think you also said in, some forum was the same for you, and I'd like to learn from you. Mostly people will spend half an hour with you for if you ask a lot of times. And if not, don't get discouraged. Find someone else that you kind of appreciate and you think they could give you advice. So if your company doesn't have a mentoring program, I would still suggest that you look for them. And don't make it scary. Just say, can I have a half an hour conversation with you to understand more your career? And it could be helpful for what I want to achieve, and go from there.
And in your experience, this was how you approach mentors. This is just identify people that you could see that could have given you something that you needed, and just approaching them simply as you just mentioned and ask, can we spend a little bit of time together? The question there would be, because there are several women and many people actually that they say, I'm shy and I don't dare to ask to someone that maybe is in a higher position, or I can see as a star in the company, and I don't dare to approach it, not even to ask for that. What suggestion would you give those women?
Yeah. Well, I would say, don't just look at the stars, or if you're a manager and you're saying, well, I should have someone on the first line of the CEO. Don't necessarily look that needs to be my mentor. Think about someone who's one or two levels above you, and they may be having something that you see in their career. You can see them on LinkedIn. You can understand their career and say, well, I can see that they probably had challenges that I'm facing, because maybe they're a woman in a woman in STEM, a woman in finance, whatever it is, and say, well, I think that and that's how you can approach them. But don't shoot for because of course, if you're, the highest level in the supply chain, you're going to have thousands of people in your organization. You're probably not going to be saying, yes, I have half an hour for you. Potentially, no. And then there's always, I don't know, depending on the company, human resources or something that you can go to and say, there's not an official mentoring program, or is there one that I can be involved in? But I'm saying don't think of, mentors can be just people that are one or two levels above you.
That's very important.
And it can be outside your company too. So there's networks like European Women on Boards that we're providing mentoring, and a lot of it, not just, there's other companies, external companies that do mentoring, and a lot of the women that are in our cross-border mentoring program are not funded by the companies. They decide they want to mentor themselves, and they come to organizations and they like us, and then that's how they join our mentoring program. So you can also look out, you don't have to be mentored inside the company. Something that's very helpful, but mentors are not your sponsors. So they're supposed to be giving you something about your development. Sponsors are different. Sponsors are the people in the company who are actually going to advocate for you. Sponsors speak about you, mentors speak with you. So you can have a mentor outside your company. They can very much help you. And it can be a male or female mentor.
Beautiful. Kristen, let me move the focus a little bit to men. We have heard so many times how different it is, the path to leadership for men and women. I think we all need to change the way we think about leadership in a more collaborative sense. And I'm wondering, what would you invite your male colleagues, leaders, to do differently so that they can better support or collaborate with women, so that women too can have I don't know if say easier, but they can have a different experience on their path to leadership? What would you invite them to do differently?
Yeah. So again, I would invite my male colleagues to move from being a positive bystander or a supportive bystander who really does believe that talented women can take more senior roles, to be an active ally. It's a different role. You need to do something, make some steps. I mean, I know a lot of men who say, I'm very supportive of women taking bigger roles, but I have a big job and I don't really have time. But you can have soft, small things that will be very helpful. Whether you don't have to become an official mentor, but maybe you have a lunch with a woman. She gave a good presentation or not so good presentation. You see that, you have lunch, you have a coffee. Next time I would suggest you do this. You don't have to take this big role. You can take the small steps, or as we were talking about earlier, being that ally in meetings, which would really be helpful, because if women can't express their points of view, it doesn't really help them be shown as a potential future leader. So, be an ally. It's not about fixing women. We're not there no one's there to fix men. We're not there to fix women. It's about how we can be given an equal share of voice, share of voice at meetings, an equal share of voice, so that people can see the talent that are in some women, just as you see the men, and be very recognizing that there's different leadership styles. We don't need to make women have that leadership style. I mean, when I first took over as Chief Diversity Officer, I had about 4 or 5 more junior men in my office saying, can we really work on diversity of leadership style? Because I'm much more of introvert listener style, and I've been told that I have to be stronger, more vocal, more, and this is not my style. So again, it's not always a gender thing. It can just be a different type of style that we need to recognize can be equally impactful and can sometimes be better from a people management perspective.
Beautiful. Would you say, therefore, that our male colleagues can be a little bit more curious about their female colleagues in terms of who they are, what actually are their goals, the desired outcomes in their career, and spend a little bit more time getting to know each other? Do you think that that's something feasible and advisable?
I mean, I think that any inclusive leader is going to should be spending time not managing people's projects, but managing their needs, their development areas, what they're doing well, leveraging their strengths, talking about where they want to go next in their career. I mean, sometimes you see in organizations that people think, I'm a people manager, I have 25 people, that gives me a lot of power. I can tell lots of people what to do. But you're a people manager because you're supposed to manage people, not things, not projects. You're supposed to help them grow and help them, achieve more in the company. So that's a big piece, no matter if you're a female or male manager. And I'm not saying that male managers are not as good as female managers. I mean, it just is more of who's being an inclusive leader and an inclusive manager. And that's where you have the curiosity to understand, Barbara, what do you want next? Let's have an open discussion on what you've done well and what your development areas are. If you're doing well, how can I leverage them? And not just hold you in my team because you're a star performer, but make you excel by actually moving you somewhere else where you could do even more at the company.
Beautiful, beautiful. One last question, Kristen. Actually, two more questions.
Okay.
The first is, what would you recommend if you had a young daughter and a young boy today? What would be one piece of advice that you would give them so that they can grow and become leaders of the future? What one piece of advice would you give them?
So, I don't have children, but I have a niece in the US, and she's getting ready to go to college, and she wants to be an oceanographer. So I really appreciate that, because she hasn't been kind of scared off from the science, because, girls do a lot better in science and math, but a lot of them don't go into those fields because there's a lot of challenges that we've already discussed today. So I would say from my niece, really go out there in the world and be curious. Talk to people that you don't know anything about, people with different abilities, different cultures, and really soak it all in like a sponge. And don't let people tell you can't do it because you're a woman, or maybe not, they won't tell you, but maybe you'll get the sense that there's some kind of underlying message there. So, let your voice be heard, and if you persevere and find the right people to work with that support you, I think you'll do very well. But, be curious and soak it in like a sponge. And if I had a nephew, I would say the same thing, because I say, that's good for everyone. And then when you see things that are not right in this world, when you see, someone in a team who's being overlooked because they're Black, or they have a different ability, and you see that it's not fair, do something about it. You don't have to stand up there and shout, but you can do it in other ways. Don't let, when we don't say anything, it says that we agree with what's happening. When you don't say even the soft words, it means everyone views it as acceptable. And that's what we don't need in this world. So we need more sons that stand up for, the underrepresented in this world.
Beautiful. So we want to be curious, and we want to stand up when we see that there are things that we can do something
that
about.
Not fair. Yep.
Yes, that it is not fair. Wonderful. Is there anything else you would like to add before we finish this session that I didn't ask you, and you think it is very important to share about?
Well, I just hope that people listening realize that when men and women and people from all different diversities work together, we really can overcome a lot. The problem is when we're saying that this doesn't have anything to do with me, or if I'm a white man, this diversity thing is not going to help me at all get ahead, or if I'm a female in America, then I'm not interested in D&I because I have a lot of other things to work on. That doesn't help the company, doesn't help us, and it definitely doesn't help the world. And I think we see a lot of this unfairness. And I think we can do something about it together. Again, it's about together. It's not about fixing this person or that person. And, so I think just make those efforts. Take one thing you're going to do differently tomorrow. One person that you don't know, one culture that you don't know, someone that you've never interacted with, and try to take that one step. It will definitely make a difference. And then the last piece, of course, I have to say is check out European Women on Boards, because I think we do great things. It's a nonprofit. We're not there to make money. We're there to help women and men get into senior decision-making roles. So you can go to europeanwomenonboards.eu.
And it is an amazing initiative, and usually are young women, older women, young men, older women, everybody can join, or is it for specific?
We're small, so we're really focusing on senior women and men, because we're looking to have more gender equality in decision making. So we're looking at women that are close to and then the C-suite or the board level positions, because again, we're talking about those levels. There's a lot of other organizations that help women and men at different levels, but we work for senior level women and men. So look at the website. You can see about the programs. You can join as an individual member, and there's a lot of great networking that you can find mentors, and you can find colleagues that can help.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I think also that they can find you there.
You can find me there. They're right there on the website. You can always contact me. Thank you for saying that, Barbara. They can always contact me, or on LinkedIn. I'm there on LinkedIn. So I'm always happy to have a conversation with anyone who is interested and is kind of facing these same challenges.
Wonderful. Kristen, has been a treat to have you here. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure. I love talking on this topic, and I really appreciate what you're doing with Be to Lead. I think we need more role models, and we need more women to be sharing what's worked and what hasn't worked with other women. We don't need to go through those same repeated challenges by ourselves.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, and see you next week again. Bye.